About 10 million Americans suffer from osteoporosis. About 34 million Americans have a reduction in their bone mass. People at greatest risk are postmenopausal women. Women are 4 times the risk. Caucasians, thin females are more prone to osteoporosis. And people who lead a lifestyle that's sedentary and don't engage in weight-bearing exercises are more prone to developing osteoporosis in their later life.
Osteoporosis is a bone disorder in which you see demineralization of the bones. So the bones become more porous and more subject to fracture over time. It's most commonly seen with aging. So as we age, we have an increased risk for bone loss. It's also common in patients who have chronic illness who receive steroids and any inflammatory illness.
Histologically, there is a reduction in the mineralization of the bone, as well as a reduction in the trabeculae of the bone and the size of the trabeculae in the bones. It is usually diagnosed radiologically.
People at the greatest risk for suffering from osteoporosis would likely be the elderly, postmenopausal women, and anyone who takes chronic steroids.
We usually start seeing osteoporosis in the postmenopausal period. So patients who are people who are hitting that age and are going through the changes should start having their bone mineral density checked and supplement their calcium and vitamin D intake if needed.
The nutrients most important to bone health are calcium and vitamin D. Some other nutrients involved in bone health are vitamin K, vitamin A, fluoride, and magnesium. And the best way to ensure that patients receive adequate nutrients for bone health are to eat a variety of dairy foods. So dairy foods like milk and yogurt and cheeses are probably your highest sources of calcium and vitamin D. You can get some vitamin D and calcium from dark green leafy vegetables like spinach or kale or collard greens, but those sources of calcium are not as readily absorbable in the GI tract as are your dairy or animal sources.
Osteoporosis and bone mineralization is exquisitely controlled by hormones and minerals within the body and intake of adequate supplements. Vitamin D and calcium are in direct control and contribute greatly to the mineralization and the buildup of bone. And they are crucial and essential for healthy bone buildup.
Calcium and vitamin D supplementation can be beneficial for the prevention of osteoporosis, but even if you've already been diagnosed with osteoporosis, calcium and vitamin D supplementation are good for avoiding progression of the disease. So you can still optimize some of your bone density with adequate calcium and supplementation.
Vitamin D and calcium are the two biggest nutrient factors in bone buildup, and there are published recommended daily allowances of both agents. At this time, the recommended daily allowance of vitamin D is 400 international units per day. There are a lot of experts who think this is too little, and they're pushing for a change to about 1,000 to 1,200 international units per day. In terms of calcium, it depends on age. In the younger age, the recommended daily allowance is about 1,500. Once you reach adulthood, it's about 1,000 milligrams a day, and once you become older and therefore more prone to osteoporosis, the recommended daily allowance goes to about 1,200 milligrams a day?
So the best food sources are mostly your dairy products, low-fat milk and yogurt, low-fat cheeses. Ice cream can be a great source, but it's also loaded with saturated fat, so you want to try and stick with your low-fat dairy sources. As far as vegetarian sources, the best vegetarian sources are your dark green vegetables, predominantly the leafy vegetables like kale or collard greens, mustard greens, beet greens, any of your dark green leafy greens. Unfortunately, with those, the absorption of calcium is not as good as what you see with animal products. If you're going to take a supplement, what the best source is, calcium carbonate, although it has less calcium per tablet than calcium citrate, the absorption rates are better. So I generally recommend that my patients take calcium carbonate with vitamin D.
The sources for vitamin D are salmon, tuna, cod liver oil, eggs, liver, cheeses. They all provide a good amount of vitamin D. But again, sun exposure. I know there's a lot of talk about lessening your sun exposure. They're all warranted and point well taken, but sun exposure is necessary for vitamin D production. 15 to 20 minutes of sun exposure a day. Again, the lifestyle is going to interfere with that. If you're spending all your time under fluorescent lights, then you lack that exposure.
Some other nutrients aside from calcium and vitamin D that aid in optimizing bone density are vitamins A, K, and the minerals fluoride and magnesium. The best way to optimize the absorption is to have your calcium, if you're going to take a supplement, to have it between your meals instead of with your meals, because some other nutrients interfere with the absorption. So for example, 3 things that interfere with calcium absorption are phytates. Phytates are something that you see in grain products, and polyphenols are found in some of your teas, and caffeine. Also, there are phytates in your dark green leafy vegetables, so that's why you sometimes see less absorption of the calcium with your dark green vegetables than you do with the dairy product.